When my daughter told me to obey her husband or leave my own house, I did not argue. I simply smiled, closed my suitcase, and walked out into the storm. She thought I would break down, but instead I uncovered secrets that would change everything. From hidden debts to betrayal that stretched back years, the truth about my son-in-law unraveled piece by piece. And when the town learned the real story, the consequences were more explosive than anyone expected. What would you have done in my place? Before we begin, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us your thoughts in the comments. Now let me take you back to the night it all began. The night it happened, the wind was already restless. It rattled the shutters against the windows and carried the scent of salt water up from the harbor below. I had always loved storms. As a boy, I used to sit on the pier with my father, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder, feeling small but safe. That night, however, the storm outside felt different. It mirrored the storm inside my own home, a place that no longer felt like it belonged to me. I had just returned from a quiet walk along the cliff. My bones ached the way old bones do, but the fresh air cleared my head. I stepped into the warm glow of the estate, a house I had built with my own hands more than 30 years ago. Every beam and stone held memories of my late wife, Helena. She had chosen the paint for the shutters, the tiles for the kitchen floor, even the old leather chair that still sat in the corner of the living room. But now the house was filled with different voices, louder ones, voices that no longer carried respect. Celine, my daughter, was at the center of it. She was standing in the hallway when I entered, her arms crossed, her face pale with frustration. She used to run to me when I came home, her laughter filling the air, but now her eyes had hardened. Beside her stood Damien, her husband. He leaned against the wall as though the house was already his posture relaxed, but his expression sharp. He was younger, stronger, and confident in a way that came not from wisdom but from arrogance. "You are late," Damien said, as if I owed him an explanation. "We were waiting for you." I looked at him, then at my daughter. Waiting for what exactly? Celine's voice trembled at first, then steadied. "For a decision." I set my walking stick against the wall and waited, letting the silence press against them. Damien spoke first, his tone casual, but his words heavy. "Things need to change around here, Elias. You live under this roof. You share this home, but you cannot keep acting like it is only yours." My jaw tightened. "This is my house. My name is on the deed. My hands built these walls." Celine stepped closer, her voice carrying that edge she had once used as a teenager when she wanted her way. "Father Damien and I run the household now. We pay the bills, we make the rules, and you need to respect that." Respect. The word echoed through me like a cruel joke. I thought of the years I had worked double shifts at the shipyard to pay her tuition, the nights Helena and I had skipped meals so that Celine could have new books, the money I had quietly handed over to cover the wedding that Damien's family could not afford. Respect. Damien's voice grew harder. "You are a guest here, Elias. Guests contribute. When I ask you to do something, you do it. No questions. No attitude." I studied his face. He wanted me to argue. He wanted me to fight. But there was no fight left in me. At least not the kind he expected. "What exactly are you demanding, Damien?" He smiled faintly, like a man testing the strength of a rope he planned to pull tighter. "Obedience. Cooperation. Call it whatever you like. When I tell you to fetch something, you fetch it. When I tell you to sit, you sit. Simple as that." Celine stood straighter, as if she were bracing herself. "Father, you need to decide right now. Either you help Damien and do as he asks, or you leave this house." The words hit me like cold water, though I had half expected them. I searched her face for any trace of the little girl who used to braid dandelions into crowns and place them on my head. All I saw was a woman who had chosen her husband's pride over her father's dignity. "All right," I said quietly. Damien's smirk widened. "Good. Then about that drink I asked you for earlier. Bring me a glass of I will pack," I interrupted. The smirk faltered. Celine's eyes widened, her lips parting as if she had not expected me to take her words seriously. "Wait, father, that is not what parking." but I was already walking down the hall. The hardwood floor creaked beneath my steps, the same floor Helena and I had refinished together decades ago. Each creak felt like a farewell. In my room, the suitcase sat on the top shelf of the closet, the one I had once used on a honeymoon trip to Florence. I pulled it down and laid it open on the bed. My hands moved without hesitation. Shirts, trousers, socks, a photograph of Helena wrapped carefully in tissue paper, my old journal where I tracked expenses. I packed slowly but firmly each folded shirt, a reminder that I was not running away but stepping forward. From the living room I heard their voices in urgent whispers. Damien's tone was sharp, Celine's softer, hesitant. They had not expected me to call their bluff. They thought I would bend as I had bent so many times before. When I wheeled the suitcase down the hall, both of them fell silent. Damien stood tall, trying to mask his unease with defiance. Celine leaned against the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed, but her eyes revealed uncertainty. Neither spoke, neither tried to stop me. I paused at the door, my hand on the handle, the weight of the keys heavy in my palm. Behind me stretched 30 years of memories, now poisoned by arrogance and betrayal. Ahead of me waited only the unknown. I opened the door and the wind rushed in. The storm outside roared as if welcoming me. I stepped into the night and closed the door behind me without looking back. The road was slick with rain as I walked to my old car parked beneath the swaying branches of a cedar tree. The engine started on the first try, the familiar hum, a small comfort in the chaos. I backed out of the driveway headlights, cutting through sheets of rain, and drove away from the house that had once been my sanctuary. The drive to the cliffside inn took half an hour. The rain beat against the windshield, blurring the world into streaks of gray. I thought of Helena, of how she had loved storms, how she had once told me that storms reveal the strength of a home. But homes were not just wood and stone. They were people, and mine had crumbled long before the first drop of rain fell that night. When I arrived, the innkeeper greeted me with polite indifference, as if an old man with a suitcase arriving in the middle of a storm was nothing unusual. The room was small but clean, with a single bed, a wooden chair, and a table by the window. I set down my suitcase and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in years, the silence belonged entirely to me. Yet even as I breathed in that silence, the weight of betrayal pressed on my chest. Celine had chosen Damien's command over my dignity. She had given me an ultimatum, expecting me to crumble. Instead, I had walked away. But walking away was only the beginning. As thunder shook the walls of the inn, I stared at the ceiling and thought of everything I had given. The tuition payments, the wedding costs, the down payment on their home, the endless bills I had quietly covered. I had told myself it was love, that it was what Helena would have wanted. But was it love, or was it weakness? The storm raged on, louder and fiercer, as if demanding an answer. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness I saw Damien's smirk, Celine's hardened expression, and Helena's gentle smile fading like mist. Somewhere deep inside, a thought began to take shape. A thought that was colder than the rain, sharper than the lightning. They would learn. I did not know how, not yet, but they would learn. And as the storm outside reached its peak, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Leaving that house had not been the end of my story. It was only the beginning. Morning arrived with a dull gray light pressing through the curtains of the inn. The storm had passed, but the sky remained heavy with clouds, as if the weather itself had not yet made peace with the night before. I rose slowly, my bones stiff from the hard mattress, and poured the inn's bitter coffee into a chipped mug. It was not the warmth of home, but it was enough. On the small wooden table by the window, I spread out my belongings. My journal, my papers, the photograph of Helena, her eyes soft and kind, even in fading black and white, and the folder I had carried with me for years, filled with statements, receipts, and documents that most people would have thrown away long ago. To me, they were not just papers. They were proof. I ran my hand over the first page, the records from Celine's university. $40,000 a year, 4 years in total. I had told myself it was an investment in her future, a way to give her opportunities Helena and I never had. I remembered the long nights at the shipyard taking on extra shifts, my back aching from the weight of steel beams, my hands raw from salt and rust. I remembered Helena sitting at the kitchen table, rubbing the knots from my shoulders, whispering that it would all be worth it. Was it worth it? The next set of papers told another story. The wedding. $25,000. Celine's dream dressed the reception hall by the sea, the flowers that filled every corner with fragrance. Damien's family could not afford their share, so I had quietly covered the difference. I remembered Helena's face that day, pale but smiling, already weakened by the illness that would soon take her. She had leaned on me during the vows, whispering that Celine looked radiant. It had felt like a gift to Helena, as much as to our daughter, a final act of love. Then came the largest figure of all, $80,000, the down payment for Celine and Damien's house. My retirement savings. Money I had meant to use for travel, for quiet years by the water, for a cabin where Helena and I could grow old together. Instead, it had gone into their foundation, their roof, their walls. I told myself that was what fathers did. They built futures for their children. But as I stared at the number on the page, I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. Futures should be earned, not handed over like gifts to those who cannot appreciate them. The smaller payments followed like a drumbeat. $1,200 a month for the mortgage, $300 for utilities, $500 for groceries when times grew tight. Over and over each line was another piece of myself given away. I had convinced myself that this was love, that by sacrificing my own comfort I was proving what family meant. But family, I realized now, was not meant to be a one-way exchange. The in-room was quiet except for the scratch of my pen as I began to take notes. Dates, amounts, totals. I wrote them with the precision of a man building a case, though I did not yet know against whom. Against Celine, against Damien, or against the part of myself that had allowed this to continue for so long. By mid-morning I closed the folder and sat back in the chair. Outside the window the sea stretched endless in gray waves, rising and falling like the breath of some great beast. I had lived my entire life by the rhythm of the ocean. The shipyard, the docks, the boats that carried fishermen out at dawn and brought them back at dusk. I knew the sea could give life, and I knew it could take it away. That morning I realized sacrifice worked the same way. It could nurture, or it could consume. My phone buzzed against the table. I did not need to look at the screen to know who it was. Celine. Probably Damien standing behind her, whispering what to say. I let it ring until the silence returned. Later that day I walked into town. Callister was small, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your history. The cobblestone streets were lined with shops that had been there for decades, some older than I was. As I passed the hardware store, the post office, the old chapel people nodded in greeting, their expressions curious. They had heard whispers already, I was sure. In towns like this, secrets spread faster than the tide. At the cafe near the harbor, I ordered a sandwich and sat in the corner. The waitress, a young woman with freckles and tired eyes, set down my plate and hesitated. "Mr. Rowan," she said softly, "are you all right?" I forced a smile. "Of course. Just needed a change of scenery." But she did not look convinced. She glanced toward the other tables where fishermen and their wives sat whispering over cups of coffee. I realized then that my absence from the estate had not gone unnoticed. Word would spread, and soon the entire town would know that Elias Rowan no longer lived under his own roof. As I ate, I thought again of the documents waiting back at the inn, numbers on a page, proof of a lifetime of sacrifice, proof that I had not abandoned my family but had in fact carried them for years, proof that would matter when the truth finally came to light. The days that followed blurred into a routine. Mornings with coffee and paperwork, afternoons, walking along the cliffs or through the town evenings with my journal open on the table. Each night I listened to the messages piling up on my phone. At first they were casual, Celine asking if there had been a mistake with the mortgage, Damien leaving clipped notes about car insurance. By the middle of the week their voices had changed. Celine's grew frantic, her words spilling fast and broken. Damien's grew sharper, laced with anger. By Friday, there were 22 missed calls. I listened to the last one, Celine's voice trembling. "Father, please, we cannot keep up without you. The bank is threatening foreclosure. Damien says, it is your responsibility, but I know you are angry. Please call me back. Please." Her words cracked, dissolving into sobs. I closed the phone and set it aside. The weight of sacrifice was no longer mine to bear. That night I sat by the window watching the waves crash against the rocks below. The sea was calmer now, but its strength was still there, hidden beneath the surface. I thought of Helena again, her voice gentle in my memory. Dignity is the only inheritance that lasts. I had given everything else away, but dignity remained. Still questions gnawed at me. Why had Damien been so eager to control me? Why had Celine, once so kind, chosen his side so quickly? Was it only arrogance, or was there something darker beneath the surface? As I drifted to sleep, those questions circled in my mind like gulls over the water. And when I woke the next morning, I knew I needed answers. The morning after, I counted 22. Missed calls. The sky over Callister was washed in a pale, uncertain light. The storm had cleared, but the air still carried a sharpness, as if the town itself had not yet decided whether it would be calm or restless. I stood by the window of my inn-room, coffee cooling in my hand, and listened to the silence. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence of strategy, like the stillness before a ship pulls anchor and sets sail into dangerous waters. My entire life had been shaped by storms. At sea, storms taught me patience. At the shipyard, they taught me strength. Now, facing the wreckage of my family, I realized storms could teach something else: retaliation. Not with anger, not with shouting, not even with fists. Retaliation through silence, through planning, through careful, deliberate action. I spread the papers across the small table once more. Mortgage statements, bank records, utility bills, receipts, insurance policies. A lifetime of sacrifice compressed into neat lines of numbers and dates. They had believed I was weak. They had believed that when they gave me their ultimatum, I would fold like a paper boat in the tide. But weakness is what they wanted to see. I had learned long ago that true strength is often quiet. I dialed the first number. The automated voice of the bank greeted me, followed by a representative whose tone carried the tired politeness of someone who had spoken to hundreds of customers already that morning. "Good morning, this is Rowan. I need to cancel the automatic mortgage payment for the property on Shoreline Road." There was a pause, then the clicking of keys. "Sir, this payment has been active for several years. Are you sure you want to stop it?" "I am sure." "May I ask the reason?" "The homeowners no longer qualify for my assistance." The words tasted sharp but satisfying. Within minutes, the process was complete. The mortgage that had drained me month after month was no longer my burden. The second call was easier. Insurance. For 3 years, my policy had covered Damien's car and Celine's as well. 2 vehicles I had never driven insured under my name, draining money I would never see again. "Remove them both," I instructed. Effective immediately. The third call took longer. Credit cards. Celine was listed as an authorized user on 3 of my accounts. Purchases I had never made. Balances I had carried quietly. The representative hesitated. "Sir, removing her will prevent further charges, but any outstanding debt remains yours." "That is fine. Remove her." One by one, the chains fell away. By noon, I had made 8 calls. Mortgage, insurance, credit cards, automatic transfers, even the grocery account tied to my bank. All severed. I wrote down confirmation numbers carefully, each one a small victory. Each one a reminder that silence does not mean surrender. It means control. When I finally sat back, the room felt lighter, though the air outside was heavy. I walked to the window and looked across the parking lot where an old couple was loading their car. The man lifted suitcases into the trunk, and the woman pointed and directed him with gentle precision. They moved together like 2 people who had weathered decades of storms side by side. I thought of Helena then, and for a moment the weight of loneliness pressed against me. She had been my anchor, my compass. Without her, I had drifted, and in drifting, I had allowed myself to be taken advantage of, but no longer. That evening, the phone rang again. I let it buzz and then checked the screen. Another call from Celine. Another message I was sure filled with pleading or anger or both. I did not listen. Instead, I opened my journal and began to write. Not just numbers this time, not just facts, but plans. They think I am gone, I wrote. They think I am finished, but I am only beginning. By midweek, the desperation in their voices had shifted. The early messages had been confusion, then anger. Now panic seeped through every word. Celine's voice cracked as she explained the bank's warnings. Damien's messages grew louder, more frantic, his temper seeping through the phone. They demanded explanations, demanded that I fix what I had undone. I deleted each one without reply. On Thursday morning, there was a knock at the door of my inn-room. Through the peephole, I saw them both. Celine's face was pale, her hair unkempt, her eyes rimmed red. Damien's jaw was clenched, his fists curled. I opened the door but did not invite them inside. Father, Celine whispered, please, we need to talk. About what? About the mortgage, about the insurance, about everything. You cannot just abandon us. Abandon, I repeated. You gave me a choice. Obey or leave. I chose to leave. Damien stepped forward, his voice sharp. You cannot just cut us off. That is not how family works. Actually, I said evenly, that is exactly how family works. Mutual respect, mutual contribution. You offered neither. Celine's eyes filled with tears. We made a mistake. We spoke in anger. But you cannot just walk away from us like this. I can, and I did. I began to close the door, but her hand shot out. Father, wait. What about family? What about everything you have done for us? Family works both ways, I said. I carried you both for years. When it was time for you to carry me, you chose him instead. Her lips trembled, and for a brief moment I saw the little girl she once was. But only for a moment. Damien pulled her arm, muttering under his breath, and together they walked back down the hall. I closed the door firmly. Behind me, the silence returned stronger than before. That night, I began a new document on my laptop. Evidence. Every payment I had made, every loan I had covered, every bill I had absorbed. If there were battles ahead, I would not fight them with emotion. I would fight them with proof. But as I typed, a new question gnawed at me. Why was Damien so desperate? Why had he pushed so hard? Demanded obedience forced Celine to choose between us. Was it only pride, or was there something deeper, darker beneath it? The answer came sooner than I expected. The next morning at the diner, I ran into an old colleague from the shipyard, a man named Gideon Vale. We had not spoken in years, but his handshake was as firm as ever. Over coffee, he leaned in close and lowered his voice. Elias, there is something you should know. A few months back, Damien came to the bank, tried to take a loan against your house, claimed it was his property. The words chilled me. My house, my name, my deed. And yet he had tried to take it as if it were his. He had papers, Gideon continued. Forged, of course. We caught it during the title search, rejected it outright. But it was deliberate, Elias. He knew exactly what he was doing. I set my cup down carefully, though my hands trembled. So this was not just arrogance, it was theft. Premeditated theft. Gideon's voice grew darker. There are whispers, too, about gambling, debts at the casino, collectors asking questions. I stared at him, the noise of the diner fading around us. Gambling, debt, lies. Everything fell into place. Damien's arrogance, his control, his fury when I refused to obey. He had not seen me as family. He had seen me as a lifeline, as his only way to escape the trap he had built for himself. When I left the diner, the air outside felt sharper, filled with a new kind of electricity. The storm I had thought was over was only beginning. That night back at the inn, I sat at my desk and opened the evidence file once more. This time I added a new section. Damian Thompson, fraud attempt, gambling debts, character witnesses, evidence of desperation. The silence of retaliation had carried me this far, but silence alone would not be enough anymore. The truth had to be uncovered, revealed, and wielded like a blade. And deep inside I knew the storm was about to break wide open. The night after Gideon told me about the forged loan papers, I could not sleep. I lay in the small inn bed listening to the hum of the wind against the old wooden frame and replayed every word he had spoken. Damien had not just wanted control. He had not just demanded obedience in my own house. He had planned to steal from me long before the ultimatum. That truth made my chest feel hollow, as if years of sacrifice had been poured into a well that had no bottom. By morning, I knew silence would no longer be enough. Silence had cut the ropes that tied me to their debts, but now I needed to know the full weight of the storm Damien had dragged into our lives. If I was to stand against him, I needed more than proof of what I had given. I needed to uncover what he had taken, what he had hidden, and what he feared most. I started with a visit to the courthouse. The building stood on the edge of town, a block of brick and stone that had once intimidated me as a young man. Back then, I had walked its halls to file paperwork for property deeds and permits when I built the estate. This time, I walked its halls for a different reason. At the clerk's office, I presented my deed, weathered by age but still firm with my name across the top. The clerk, a woman with sharp eyes and tired hands, compared it to recent filings. Her expression hardened as she flipped through records. "Mr. Rowan," she said, "your son-in-law filed paperwork claiming partial ownership 3 months ago. It was rejected, of course, but the attempt is on record." I stood silently, though my heart pounded in my chest. 3 months. Even as I had been quietly paying their bills, even as I had been ensuring they never went hungry, Damien had been plotting to erase me from my own home. "Do you wish to file an eviction notice?" she asked. I hesitated. Eviction. It was a cold word, sharp and final. But as I thought of Damien lounging in my chair, demanding I fetch him a drink as if I were a servant, the answer became clear. "Yes," I said. "File it." The clerk stamped the papers with practiced efficiency. 30 days, she explained. If they contest it, there will be a hearing. Otherwise, the sheriff will serve the final notice. As I left the courthouse, the paper in my hand felt heavier than its weight. It was not just a document. It was a turning point. From there, I walked to the police station. The officer at the desk directed me to a small office at the back where Detective Jonas Mercer worked. Jonas had aged since I last saw him, his hair grayer, his eyes lined from years of watching human weakness take shape in crime. But his handshake was still firm, and his voice carried the authority of a man who knew when to listen. "What brings you here, Elias?" I told him everything. The ultimatum, the forged loan papers, the whispers of gambling debts. He listened carefully, making notes on a yellow pad, occasionally lifting his eyes to study me. When I finished, he tapped the pencil against the desk. "Your son-in-law is a regular at Glacier Peak Casino," he said. "Poker, mostly. Staff say he has been playing higher stakes lately and losing more often than he wins." "How much does he owe?" I asked. "Different creditors, different amounts. 18 to 20,000 by our estimate." The number stunned me. That was more than some men earned in a year at the shipyard. And Damien had burned it away at cards and dice while I bought his groceries and covered his bills. Jonas leaned forward. "Some of those creditors are legitimate lenders. Others are not. The kind of men who do not wait long before they collect, and who do not care much about the law." I understood. These were not men who sent letters or made polite phone calls. These were men who knocked on doors at midnight, who whispered threats in alleys, who left reminders on doorsteps that no one could ignore. "Be careful," Jonas warned. "A man in debt that deep is desperate, and desperation makes men dangerous." I left the station with his words heavy in my mind. Desperate. Dangerous. It explained Damien's fury, his arrogance, his demand for control. I was not just a father-in-law standing in his way. I was his last lifeline, and I had cut it. That evening, I returned to the inn and opened a new file on my laptop. I titled it Damian Thompson Evidence. Into it, I poured every detail I had gathered. The attempted loan fraud, the eviction, notice the gambling debts, the whispers of collectors. Piece by piece, I built a portrait of a man who was not just selfish but reckless, not just entitled but criminal. Still, I needed more. Proof was not enough. I needed the truth to breathe beyond the walls of the inn. And in a town like Callister, truth traveled fastest, not through official channels, but through whispers, through markets and cafes, through Sunday services where every ear listened and every mouth repeated what it heard. The first whisper began at the post office. Mrs. Holloway, a woman known for collecting stories as eagerly as she collected recipes, caught me near the counter. "Elias, dear, I heard troubling things. Is it true you left your own home?" I considered my answer carefully. Whatever I said would be repeated a dozen times before the end of the day. "Celine and Damien asked me to leave," I said simply. "Sometimes children need to manage their own responsibilities." Her eyebrows shot up. "They asked you to leave the house you built." I nodded once. Her lips pressed thin, and I knew the story would spread by nightfall. Next came the hardware store where I had once worked part-time after retiring. The owner, Tom Carver, set down his ledger when he saw me. "Elias, folks are saying you moved out to the inn. Is that true?" "It is." "What happened?" I explained, just enough. The years of support, the ultimatum, the decision to walk away. His reaction was immediate. Fury at Damien, pity for me, shock at the scale of what I had given. The younger clerks nearby listened too, their faces pale as the story reached their ears. By the time I left, I knew the truth was already moving faster than I could follow. Callister was a small town, and small towns had long memories. The final stop was the chapel. Pastor Abram greeted me with the same gentle authority he had carried for decades. He listened quietly as I explained, his expression heavy with sorrow. Sometimes, he said softly, the hardest thing we can do is step aside and let others face the consequences of their choices. I left his office with those words echoing in my mind. Step aside, let them face it. But Damien was not a man who would step aside quietly. By Saturday morning, I began to hear of his counterattack. He was moving through town loud and bitter, telling anyone who would listen that I had abandoned them in a moment of weakness. He claimed I was unstable, that I was being manipulated by others. He even went so far as to suggest there was a family emergency, a pregnancy, a crisis, that I was cruelly ignoring. The stories clashed with the whispers already spreading. Some believed him, others raised eyebrows, connecting the pieces themselves. And I knew then that the battle was no longer just about money, it was about truth, about which story the town would believe. That evening I returned to the inn and sat in the dim light, the sound of waves breaking against the cliffs below. Damien was desperate, more desperate than I had imagined. But desperation drives men to recklessness, and recklessness leaves trails. If I followed those trails, I would uncover everything, the lies, the debts, the secrets buried in the shadows, and once I had them, I could bring them into the light where no rumor or lie could survive. By the time Sunday morning came, the whispers in Callister had grown louder than the church bells. Wherever I walked, eyes followed. Some carried sympathy, others suspicion. It was clear that Damien's words had reached many ears, just as I expected they would. But lies, like seawater, have a taste you cannot hide. The more people heard his version, the more questions began to rise. At first, I tried to ignore it. I kept my head down, sipping bitter coffee at the harbor cafe, walking the quiet lanes near the cliffs, updating my file of evidence each night. But by midweek, the storm Damien was stirring could no longer be ignored. I heard first from Tom Carver at the hardware store. He called me mid-morning, his voice sharp with controlled anger. "Elias, you should know Damien came by today. Stood right at the counter telling anyone who would listen that you abandoned him and Celine without warning. Said you were having some sort of breakdown, that you were being manipulated. Even claimed Celine was carrying a child and the stress you caused might cost them the baby." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. Tom went on. "He wanted sympathy, Elias. He wanted people to see him as the victim. But I have known you too long to believe it. Others are beginning to see through it too. After Tom hung up, I sat in silence. My heart ached at the thought of Celine repeating such lies, or worse, allowing herself to be used as part of them. Yet underneath the ache was something sharper: anger. The kind of anger that comes when a man sees his life twisted into a story that is not his own. The next blow came from Detective Mercer. He phoned the following morning. "Elias, I wanted to give you a heads up. Damien filed a complaint. Claims you are being manipulated financially, that you are the victim of elder abuse. He is trying to establish a record of incompetence." My stomach turned cold. Elder abuse. That was the angle he had chosen. Not only to steal my money, but to strip me of my dignity. "Do not worry," Mercer assured me. "He cannot prove it. He would need doctors, witnesses, paperwork he does not have. Still, you should be prepared. Men like him, when they are cornered, they grow louder." That evening, as I walked through the marketplace, I heard the rumors myself. Damien's voice carried across the stalls, smooth and convincing to those who did not know better. He spoke of a frail old man losing his mind, of a family abandoned out of spite of a pregnancy now at risk. He stood tall, gesturing like an actor, while Celine lingered nearby, her eyes downcast. I stopped at the edge of the crowd. The sun was setting, the last light glinting off the harbor waters, and Damien's words floated on the sea breeze. My chest tightened. I could have turned away. I could have left him to spin his lies. But some storms cannot be avoided. Some must be faced head on. I stepped forward. The crowd parted as they noticed me. Faces turned, whispers rippled. Damien faltered for just a second, but then his smirk returned. "Well, look who decided to show up. The man who abandoned his family." "Hello, Damien," I said, my voice steady. "How is the gambling debt treating you?" His face blanched, the smirk collapsing. Murmurs spread instantly through the crowd. Gambling debt. The words clung to the air like smoke. I went on before he could recover. $18,000 at Glacier Peak Casino, mostly poker. That is what Detective Mercer tells me. And that is not counting what you owe to men who do not use contracts or lawyers. The whispers grew louder. People exchanged looks, eyes widening. Some pulled out their phones, already recording. Damien sputtered, his voice breaking. "Lies. All lies. He does not know what he is talking about." I took a step closer. "I can document every dollar I spent supporting you for years. Can you document where your paychecks went?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. His face turned red, then purple, his fists clenched. The crowd waited silent now, hungry for his answer. But none came. Finally, he shoved his way through the people, muttering curses, his swagger broken, his shoulders hunched. Celine followed after him, her head low. The crowd remained buzzing with energy. Some clapped me on the shoulder, others shook their heads in disbelief. The story had shifted. The mask Damien wore was torn, and everyone had seen the truth underneath. Back at the inn that night, I replayed the confrontation in my mind. For the first time in months, I felt a measure of peace. But it was not victory. It was only the beginning. Damien would not stop, a man that desperate never does. And now that his lies had failed in public, he would turn to other means. Sure enough, the next morning the innkeeper knocked on my door. "Elias, I thought you should know. That son-in-law of yours was seen pacing outside last night, muttering to himself, angry. He stood near your door for a long time, made the guests nervous." The innkeeper's eyes were wary. "We have security footage if you want it." "Yes," I said. "Keep it safe." By afternoon, I was at the police station again, the footage in hand. Mercer reviewed it carefully, then looked at me. "Elias, this shows a pattern. Intimidation, harassment. Combined with yesterday's outburst, we can file for a restraining order." "What would that mean?" "It would mean he cannot come within 500 feet of you or your property. If he tries, we arrest him." I nodded slowly. "Do it." By evening, the papers were signed. Damien had tried to take my home with lies, had tried to strip me of my dignity with rumors, had tried to frighten me into submission with his presence. But now for the first time he was the one pushed back, the one forbidden, the one cornered. That night, as I sat by the window of the inn, I realized something important. This was no longer about family. It was not even about debt or betrayal. It was about survival. Damien had staked his future on me, on my silence, on my compliance, on my willingness to carry his weight. Now that I had cut him off, he had nothing left. And a man with nothing left can be more dangerous than any storm. The phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened later, the voice was unfamiliar, low, and direct. "This is Marcus Webb from Frontier Financial. We are looking for Damian Thompson regarding a past due account. He listed your address. Please call us." So the collectors had begun. One call would become 2, then 10, then more. Soon they would be knocking on his door instead of mine. The next day I walked to the cafe. Conversations hushed as I entered. People knew now. They had seen the confrontation, had heard the numbers, had watched the mask slip from Damien's face. Some nodded to me with respect, others simply stared. The tide had turned. But tides, I knew, are never permanent. They rise and fall, shift and turn. Damien would not run forever. He would fight back again, harder, sharper, more dangerous than before. And the next battle would not be fought in whispers or rumors. It would come face to face in the open, where no lie could hide. The restraining order had been signed, the confrontation in the marketplace had spread through every corner of Callister, and yet I could not rest. Nights were restless, my sleep broken by shadows of Helena's voice and Celine's tearful face. I knew Damien was dangerous, but the question that haunted me more was whether my daughter had already followed him too far to come back. I had raised Celine to be kind. Helena and I had poured into her not just money, but patience, guidance, love. She had once run through the fields barefoot chasing fireflies, her laughter brighter than the stars. I still carried those memories like photographs, but when I looked into her eyes now, I saw only conflict. The kind of conflict that comes when love and loyalty are chained to lies. It was Friday evening when she called. I let the phone ring once, twice, 3 times before I answered. Her voice was thin, trembling. "Father, please. We need to talk." About what I asked, though, my heart already knew. Everything. Damien lost his job today. The phone will not stop ringing. Men are coming to the house asking questions. I do not know what to do anymore. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch until she spoke again. "Father, please, meet me, just me, without Damien." There was a long pause. Then I said, "Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Main Street Diner. Back corner." The next day I arrived early. The diner smelled of frying bacon and strong coffee, the low murmur of conversations filling the air. I chose the booth against the wall, the one that faced away from the windows. I wanted no distractions, only the truth. Celine arrived 10 minutes late. Her hair was pulled back in a loose knot, her eyes ringed with sleepless shadows. She slid into the booth across from me, her hands trembling as she gripped the menu, though she did not read it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavier than any storm. Finally, she whispered, "Father, I do not know how things became like this." "They became like this," I said calmly, "because you chose him over me." Her lips parted, but no words came. She lowered her eyes, tears spilling onto the laminated menu. "Damien is not the man I thought he was. He lies. He hides things. The debts are worse than I imagined." I leaned forward. "And now you must decide." Her eyes lifted to mine, wide and frightened. "Decide what? Whether you will keep following him into the shadows, or whether you will step into the light." She shook her head, her voice breaking. "If I leave him, I lose everything. My home, my future, my marriage." "You already lost those," I said. "You just have not admitted it yet." The waitress came by, refilled our cups, and slipped away without a word. The tension between us must have been plain to see. I continued. "Here is what I am offering you. One chance. Public acknowledgement of the truth. You will stand before the town, before the people who watched me sacrifice for you, and you will admit what happened. That I paid for your education, your wedding, your house. That I carried your debts for years. That when Damien demanded my obedience, you stood with him. You will confess it all. Her face flushed crimson. Father, you are asking me to humiliate myself. No, I said. I am asking you to tell the truth. Her hands clenched the coffee cup so tightly I feared it would break. What if I cannot? What if I cannot? Stand before everyone and admit what I have done. Then you will live with the consequences. She stared at me silent, and I saw the battle raging inside her. Loyalty to a husband who had lied and stolen. Guilt toward a father who had given everything. Fear of the eyes of the town, of their judgment, their whispers. Her voice broke when she spoke again. And if I do this, if I stand before them and speak the truth, then perhaps over time we can rebuild something. Not what we had, but something new. Respect between two adults, not chains of obligation between parent and child. Tears streamed freely now. Do you think you can ever forgive me? Forgiveness, I said softly, is not the same as trust. I forgave you the day I walked away rather than fight. But trust must be earned back one action at a time. The clock on the wall ticked louder than any voice. After a long silence, she whispered, "When's Sunday?" 10 o'clock. At the chapel. If you are not there, I will know your choice. She nodded, rose slowly, and left the diner without another word. I remained at the booth long after she was gone. The coffee cooled in my cup, the conversations around me swirled and shifted, but I heard none of it. I saw only the image of my daughter walking away, shoulders bent, carrying the weight of a decision that would shape the rest of her life. That night I could not sleep. I walked along the cliffs, instead the wind sharp against my face, the sea below roaring like a living thing. I thought of Helena again, her voice soft in my memory. Dignity is the only inheritance that lasts. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps dignity was the only thing I could pass to Celine now. Sunday morning arrived, crisp and clear, the sky washed blue after days of storm. I walked into the chapel and felt the weight of every eye upon me. The sanctuary was fuller than usual, word having spread of some kind of announcement. I sat 3 rows from the front, my hands steady, my face calm. Inside, my heart pounded like the sea against rocks. Pastor Abram began the service, as always, hymns and readings filling the air. But the anticipation was thick, a current that pulled every ear toward what was coming. When the moment for testimony arrived, the room fell silent. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then from the back, Celine stood. Her steps were slow, trembling but steady. She walked down the center aisle, her hands clenched together, her face pale. The entire room watched, breath held as she climbed the steps to the podium. She gripped the edges, her knuckles white, and looked out at faces she had known her whole life. For a moment she seemed about to collapse. Then her voice carried out clear, though quivering. "I need to tell you something about my father." The sanctuary was silent, even the children sensing the gravity of her words. "For the past 5 years," she continued, "my father has supported me and my husband. He paid for my education. He paid for our wedding. He paid for our home. When we could not manage the mortgage, he covered it. When we needed groceries, he bought them. When we needed insurance, he carried it." Murmurs spread through the room. Numbers whispered. Faces turned toward me with new understanding. Celine's voice grew stronger as tears streamed down her cheeks. "And when my husband demanded that he serve us like a servant, when my father refused, I stood with my husband instead. I gave my father an ultimatum: obey or leave. And he left." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. Her eyes found mine across the pews. "Father, I was wrong. Damien was wrong. My father gave me everything, and I repaid him with betrayal." Her words broke her shoulders, shook, but her voice carried through the silence. "I am sorry, truly sorry." The congregation erupted into murmurs again. Some shook their heads, others wiped tears, many whispered to one another, Pastor Abram stepped forward, his eyes wet, and laid a hand on Celine's shoulder. Sometimes he said softly, "Courage means admitting we were wrong." I remained seated, my face calm, but inside me a storm raged. Pride, sorrow, relief, and something else. A question. Because even as Celine stood before the town confessing everything, Damien's shadow still lingered. He was gone from the chapel, absent from the pews, but I knew he had not vanished. Men like him never vanish. They retreat, they plan, they strike again. The chapel service ended in a storm of murmurs, handshakes, and sympathetic glances, but my mind was far from calm. Celine had chosen truth, yes. She had stood before the town and admitted what I had carried for years. It was a beginning, perhaps even a redemption. Yet outside those chapel walls, Damien still prowled like a wounded animal, desperate and cornered. I left through the side door, preferring the quiet path along the garden to the crowded main exit. The autumn air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and wood smoke drifting from chimneys across town. As I walked, I thought of Helena. She had always said storms reveal character. Celine's storm had revealed a spark of courage. But Damien's storm was still gathering, and when it broke, it would be violent. The signs came quickly. That same afternoon, Tom Carver stopped me outside the hardware store. His face was grim. Alias creditors have been circling Damien. 2 different men came by asking questions this morning. One of them did not look like the type to file paperwork. I thanked him and walked on, but the weight of his words stayed with me. By evening, the proof was undeniable. From my window at the inn, I saw a black sedan parked near the estate, its engine idling, its occupants hidden by tinted glass. They did not stay long, but they would return. Men like that always did. The next day brought more news. Damien had been fired from the dealership. His boss, Mike Brennan, phoned me directly. "Elias, I had to let him go. Customers are whispering about his debts, his gambling. I cannot have that around my business. I am sorry. Sorry." The word echoed like a bell. Sorry could not erase the damage Damien had done. Sorry could not replace the years he had stolen. By midweek, his world had begun to collapse. Debt collectors arrived at the estate. Neighbors whispered of shouting late into the night, of dishes thrown against walls, of Celine weeping on the porch when she thought no one was watching. The fairy tale marriage built on my sacrifice was crumbling brick by brick. And then came the sheriff's deputy. Papers served. The eviction notice finalized. 30 days, no more. The house was mine as it had always been, and Damien's claim was dust. I watched from a distance as the deputy handed him the documents. Damien's face twisted with rage, his hands shaking as he read. He shouted, cursed, threw the papers into the yard, but there was nothing he could do. The law was no longer his to twist. Still, his desperation grew. He sent messages, threats at first full of venom, then pleas dripping with false humility. I ignored them all. Silence, I had learned, was my sharpest weapon. Celine called once more, her voice quiet and weary. "Father, he is talking about leaving town, packing up, disappearing." I closed my eyes, listening to the tremor in her words. "Then let him. But what about me?" she whispered. "That choice is yours," I said. "Follow him into the shadows, or stay and rebuild your life with honesty." There was a long silence before she hung up. The next morning I drove to the estate one last time. Not to enter, but to watch. Damien was in the driveway loading bags into his truck. His movements were frantic, jerky, the movements of a man running not toward something, but away from it. Celine stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, her face pale. They shouted at one another, their words carried faintly on the wind, though I could not make out what was said. Finally, Damien slammed the truck door, shouted one last curse, and drove away. The sound of his engine faded into the distance, leaving only silence behind. Celine remained standing on the porch long after he was gone. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile against the frame of the house. When she finally turned, our eyes met across the distance. She raised a hand almost as if to wave, then let it fall. I drove away without stopping. It was her battle now. Days turned into weeks. Damien's name became a curse in Callister. Stories of his debts, his gambling, his lies spread faster than he could outrun them. No one knew where he had gone. Some said east, others said across the border. To me it did not matter. He was gone, and with him the shadow he had cast over my life. But I could not simply return to the estate and pretend nothing had changed. That house, once a sanctuary, had become a place of betrayal. Its walls echoed with arguments, its floors carried the memory of footsteps that had disrespected me. I knew I could not live there again. Instead, I made a decision. The house would serve a new purpose. I met with a representative from the Seafarers' Refuge, an organization that provided housing for retired sailors and widows of fishermen lost at sea. Men and women who knew sacrifice, who understood storms, who had earned dignity through hardship. 3 months later, the house had been transformed. No longer a single-family estate, it was divided into 3 separate apartments, each home filled with light and laughter. I stood in the yard as the first families arrived, their children running to the swing set donated by local businesses, their parents carrying boxes with hope in their eyes. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, recently returned from deployment, shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Rowan, this means everything to us." I smiled, the weight on my chest finally easing. This house should belong to people who understand sacrifice, people who will honor it. As I watched them settle in, I thought of Helena. I imagined her standing beside me, her hand in mine, her smile soft and proud. For the first time in years, I felt peace. I did not return to the inn that night. Instead, I drove north along winding roads that hugged the lake. At the water's edge stood a small cabin I had purchased quietly, using money no longer wasted on Damien's debts. It was not large, not grand, but it was mine. Inside, the room smelled of pine and stone. The windows opened onto the lake, where the sun set in streaks of gold and orange. There was a small dock where I could launch a boat, a fireplace where I could read in the evenings, and enough space for quiet mornings with coffee and the sound of loons across the water. This was the life I had dreamed of with Helena. Simple, honest, free. One evening, as I sat on the deck watching the water, my phone buzzed. A message from Celine. "Father, I am 3 months into counseling. I am learning about healthy relationships, about responsibility. Could we meet for coffee? I want to earn your trust back, one conversation at a time." I read the words twice, then a third time. My heart tightened, but not with anger, with hope. She was trying. For the first time in years, she was not asking for money or favors. She was asking for the chance to rebuild. I typed back slowly. "Coffee sounds good. Saturday morning, the diner." Her reply came quickly. "I will be there. And Father, thank you for not giving up on me." I set the phone aside and looked out at the lake. The sun was setting the sky ablaze, the water glowing. In the distance, I heard children laughing from the veteran families now living in my old house. Their joy filled the air like a hymn. Justice had been served. My dignity was intact. And perhaps, just perhaps, a bond between father and daughter could be rebuilt on truth instead of lies. The days at the cabin passed in quiet rhythm, each sunrise and sunset washing the lake in new colors. Some mornings the water lay still, a mirror of the sky. Other mornings waves rippled across its surface, restless, alive, as if reminding me that peace is never permanent, only earned one day at a time. I embraced both moods of the lake. After all, had I not lived through both calm and storm? In those still hours, I found space to think. Not of Damien, he had fled like a shadow at dawn, leaving behind nothing but debts and whispers, but of Celine, my daughter. The girl who had once climbed onto my shoulders during parades, the teenager who had argued about curfews, the woman who had chosen her husband's pride over her father's dignity, and now the woman who had stood in front of the town, trembling but unbroken, admitting her mistakes. I did not fool myself. Words alone do not rebuild trust. But words can be the first stone laid in a new foundation. And Celine had laid hers in public, where every eye and ear in Callister could bear witness. That courage, though late, was still courage. When Saturday morning came, I drove back into town for the first time in weeks. The diner looked the same as it always had, windows fogged with steam, the scent of bacon and coffee spilling into the street. Yet stepping inside felt different. Whispers followed me still, but they were whispers of respect, not suspicion. The town had chosen its side. Celine was already waiting in the back corner booth. She rose when she saw me, her movements hesitant, her eyes searching mine. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then I nodded once and she sat again. The waitress brought coffee without asking, setting down 2 cups and slipping away. Celine stared at the steam rising from hers, her hands wrapped tightly around the porcelain. "Father," she said softly, "I do not expect forgiveness overnight. I do not even expect it next month or next year. But I want to try." I studied her face. She looked older, wearier, but also clearer, as if the weight of denial had finally lifted. "I want honesty," I said. "No more lies, no more ultimatums. Only honesty." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. "Then that is what you will have." We spoke for hours. About her counseling sessions, about the debts she had discovered Damien had hidden even from her, about the divorce papers she had filed. She confessed her shame, her fear, her regret. And though part of me ached to embrace her, as I once had another part held back, trust, I reminded myself, is not given freely once broken. It must be earned. As we left the diner, she paused on the sidewalk. "Father, do you think you will ever let me into your life again?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw both the daughter I had lost and the woman she was becoming. "I will let you walk beside me," I said, "one step at a time." Her tears fell, but she smiled. "That is all I ask." Weeks turned into months, and the distance between us slowly narrowed. Not erased, but narrowed. We shared more coffees, more walks along the harbor, more conversations filled with honesty instead of demands. Each meeting was a test, and each time she chose truth, she passed. Yet through it all, I held to Helena's words. Dignity is the only inheritance that lasts. I had given away my money, my savings, my home. I had nearly given away my peace. But I had kept my dignity, and in keeping it, I had rediscovered myself. The estate on Shoreline Road no longer stood as a reminder of betrayal. Now it was alive with new families, veterans and their children who filled the walls with gratitude and laughter. Each time I visited, the sound of children playing on the swing set filled me with quiet joy. I had not lost the house. I had transformed it. From a place of pain into a place of renewal. That was legacy. One afternoon, as I stood on the cabin dock with a fishing rod in hand, I realized something profound. For years, I had thought sacrifice meant giving everything without question. That was what a husband did, what a father did, what love demanded. But sacrifice without dignity is not love. It is surrender. And surrender only feeds those who would take until nothing is left. I had learned too late, perhaps, that true love requires boundaries. That saying no can sometimes be the most loving act of all. Not only for myself, but for the one I said it to. Because Celine would never have faced the truth if I had continued to shield her from consequences. She would never have learned what it meant to stand on her own 2 feet if I had carried her forever. The osprey dove into the lake, rising with a fish glinting silver in its talons. I watched it soar overhead, powerful and free, and I understood. My story was not about loss, not truly. It was about transformation. About turning storms into lessons, betrayals into boundaries, endings into beginnings. That night, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the lake in gold and crimson, I sat on the deck and wrote in my journal. Not just numbers this time, not just records of debts and sacrifices, but reflections. Words I hoped Celine would one day read, words that would outlast me. Family is not measured by money given or debts forgiven. It is measured by respect. Dignity is not something others can grant. It is something you must claim. Legacy is not property or wealth. It is the truth you leave behind. When I closed the journal, the cabin was quiet but not empty. In the stillness, I felt Helena's presence steady and warm as though she approved. My phone buzzed once more. A message from Celine. "Thank you, Father, for the coffee, for the patience, for giving me a chance. I love you." I smiled and set the phone aside. The lake shimmered under the last light, and I knew the storm had finally passed. There would always be new winds, new waves, but I was ready. Ready because I had learned the difference between sacrifice and surrender. Ready because dignity had carried me through. Ready because I had not given up on my daughter, and she had not given up on herself. And so I leave you with this. If you are ever asked to surrender your dignity for the comfort of others, do not. If you are ever told to obey where there should be respect, walk away. If you are ever tempted to give so much that nothing remains of you, remember this story. Remember that storms do not just destroy, they reveal. The lake grew colder as autumn deepened. Mornings brought mist that curled across the water, and evenings came sooner, the mountains swallowing the sun before supper. At the cabin, life settled into a rhythm I had never known before. Quiet, steady, free from demands. I rose with the dawn, brewed coffee strong enough to chase the chill, and sat on the dock watching the day unfold. From time to time I still drove into Callister. Not for gossip, not for business, but for small things that reminded me I was part of the world. Bread from the bakery, nails from the hardware store, a brief word with Tom Carver, who always asked how I was holding up. The townsfolk had long since chosen their side, and though the sting of betrayal lingered, I carried their respect now, not as a man broken by his family, but as a man who had stood his ground. The estate on Shoreline Road had been fully transformed by then. Where once Celine and Damien had argued behind closed doors, now laughter rang across the yard. Children played tag near the garden, mothers called them in for supper, fathers repaired bicycles in the drive. The veterans and their families treated the house not as a prize, but as a gift, and that made all the difference. Each time I visited, gratitude shone in their faces. It eased the ache in my chest to know the place that once weighed me down now lifted others up. Celine came with me once, standing awkwardly in the yard as children darted past. She looked at the families, then at me. "Father, they are happy here." "Yes," I said. "They understand sacrifice." Her voice caught. "I wish I had understood sooner." "You are learning now," I told her. "That is what matters." She nodded, though her eyes glistened with tears. We left without saying more, but I could see the lesson had struck deep. Some truths only reveal themselves when spoken aloud, and she was beginning to accept hers. Back at the cabin, I kept writing in my journal. Not numbers, not debts, but reflections. Each entry became a letter addressed not only to Celine, but to anyone who might one day read them. I wrote about the cost of silence, the weight of sacrifice, the line between love and surrender. I wrote about storms and what they reveal about dignity as an inheritance greater than gold. One evening, Celine came again, this time alone. She sat on the deck staring at the lake as the sun set. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "Damien is gone. I do not know where. He left nothing behind but debts and empty promises." I studied her face. There was sorrow there, but also relief. "Then it is time to begin again," I said. She turned toward me, her expression uncertain. "Can you ever trust me again? Trust must be rebuilt," I replied. "Stone by stone, day by day." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. "Then I will keep building, Father, as long as it takes." That night after she left, I stood on the dock and looked out across the water. The moon cast silver ripples across the lake, and for the first time in many years I felt something close to peace. The storm had passed. Not gone forever, for storms always return, but passed for now. Celine's path would be long, but it was hers to walk. Mine was different. Mine was to live the days Helena and I had once dreamed of. Simple days, honest days, days not burdened by chains of obligation. And so life continued. I fished the lake. I mended the cabin roof before the first snow. I brewed coffee strong enough to shake the bones. And when my daughter asked for another meeting, another chance, I gave her the same answer, one step at a time. because dignity once reclaimed is not surrendered again. This story is not only about betrayal or sacrifice. It is about learning that love without respect becomes weakness. It is about discovering that dignity is not something others can give or take away. It is something you must hold on to even when the cost feels unbearable. Family can wound us the deepest because we give them the most. But family can also heal when truth is faced and responsibility accepted. Elias Rowan learned that silence is not surrender, that storms can be survived, and that legacy is not money or property. Legacy is the truth you leave behind, the example of standing firm when the world tells you to bow. And perhaps most of all, this story reminds us that forgiveness is possible, but trust must be earned. Step by step, word by word, action by action. If this story spoke to you, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories. I would love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below and tell us what this story meant to you.